Hello, I'm Willie from the Ozarks, and we're ready for Lesson 28 in A Course in Miracles Workbook for Students. We're reading from the original edition here on January the 28th of 2023. I said 22 the other day. Thank you all so much for joining me. Above all else, I want to see things differently. Above all else, I want to see. But today we're adding from yesterday, and a continuation. Above all else, I want to see things differently. Today we are really giving specific application to the idea for yesterday. In these practice periods, you will be making a series of definite commitments. The question of whether you will keep them in the future is not our concern here. The question of whether you will keep them in the future is not our concern here. If you're willing at least to make them now, you have started on the way to keeping them, and we are still at the beginning. You may wonder why it is important to say, for example, above all else, I want to see this table differently. In itself, it is not important at all. Yet what is by itself? And what does in itself mean? You see a lot of separate things about you, which really means you are not seeing at all. You see a lot of separate things about you, which really means you're not seeing at all, because we're all interconnected. You either see or not. When you have seen one thing differently, you will see all things differently. The light you will see in any one of them is the same light you will see in them all. When you say, above all else, I want to see this table differently, you are making a commitment to withdraw your preconceived ideas about the table and open your mind to what is and what it is for. You're not defining it in past terms. You are asking what it is rather than telling it what it is. You are not binding its meaning to your tiny experience of tables, nor are you limiting its purpose to your little personal thoughts. You will not question what you have already defined. You will not question what you have already defined. And the purpose of these exercises is to ask questions and to receive the answers. In saying, above all else, I want to see this table differently, you are committing yourself to seeing. It is not an exclusive commitment. It is a commitment which applies to the table just as much as to anything else, neither more nor less. You could, in fact, gain vision from just that table if you could withdraw all your own ideas from it and look upon it with a completely open mind. It has something to show you, something beautiful and clean and of infinite value, full of happiness and hope. Hidden under all your ideas about it is its real purpose, the purpose it shares with all the universe. In using the table as a subject for applying the idea for today, you are therefore really asking to see the purpose of the universe. You will be making the same request of each subject which you use in the practice periods. Let's read that again. In using the table, for example, as a subject for applying the idea for today, you're therefore really asking to see the purpose of the universe. You will be making the same request of each subject which you use in the practice periods, and you are making a commitment to each of them to let their purpose be revealed to you, instead of placing your own judgment upon them. We will have 6 2-minute practice periods today in which the idea for the day is stated first, above all else, I want to see things differently, and then applied to whatever you see in looking about you. Not only should the subjects be chosen randomly, but each one should be accorded equal sincerity as today's ideas applied to it in an attempt to acknowledge the equal value of them all in their contribution to your seeing. As usual, the applications should include the name of the subject which your eyes happen to light on, and you should rest your eyes on it while saying, above all else, I want to see this blank differently. When we sing, I'll just say, I'll hum it. And then you can fill it in. We'll do it for a couple minutes with the song, and you can kind of apply it as a start for the day. Each application should be made quite slowly and as thoughtfully as possible. There is no hurry. That's an important aspect of it. Each application should be made quite slowly and as thoughtfully as possible. There is no hurry. There is no hurry. We're home. That's how I like to think of it. All right, let's go take, before we do that practice, let's go take a look at our text reading. And we're ready for, let's see, what are we? Chapter 4, the root of all evil, which we've learned was the authority problem so far. And he's explaining it further, obviously. And we're ready for section 3, the ego and false autonomy. And while you're turning there, let me tell you about another plum out of ediblelandscaping.com. And remember, it is time here in January to be planting all your tomatoes. I'm not going to go all detailed about what tomatoes to plant, but I'd encourage you to pick a few tomatoes and get them planted, get them started. 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost. Bruce plum, early fruiting, open spreading small tree. A cross between Japanese plum and native Chickasaw. Brown rot resistant, introduced in 1921 by A.L. Bruce of Donelly County, Texas, zone 6 through 8, pollinate with other Japanese plums. Space 8 to 10 foot circles. And let's see, what is that? This one here is the Bruce plum is a Prunes salicina crossed with an angustifolia. Okay, so that's your Bruce plum. Let's go take a look now. The ego and false autonomy. You have asked lately how the mind could ever have made the ego. This is a perfectly reasonable question. In fact, the best question you could ask. There is, however, no point in giving an historical answer, because the past does not matter in human terms, and history would not exist if the same errors were not being repeated in the present. Abstract thought applies to knowledge, because knowledge is completely impersonal, and examples are irrelevant to its understanding. Perception, however, is always specific, and therefore quite concrete. 25. Each man makes one ego for himself, although it is subject to enormous variation because of its instability, and one for everyone he perceives, which is equally variable. Their interaction is a process which literally alters both, because they were not made either by or with the unalterable. It is particularly important to realize that this alteration can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in mind as when it involves physical presence. Thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. Very key, important thing, how we can speed up, really speed things up when you realize that you don't have to have physical contact or be in the relative physical proximity of someone that you say want to forgive, or somebody you want to perceive differently, somebody you want to love in a better way than you had in the past. So let's read that again. It is particularly important, he says, to realize that this alteration can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical presence. Thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. There could be no better example of the fact that the ego is an idea, though not a reality-based thought. 26. Your own present state is a good example of how the mind made the ego. You do not have knowledge at times, but when you throw it away, it is as if you never had it. This willfulness is so apparent that one need only perceive it to see that it does happen. If it can occur that way in the present, why is it surprising that it occurred that way in the past? Psychology rests on the principle of the continuity of behavior. Surprise is a reasonable response to the unfamiliar, but hardly to something that has occurred with such persistence. I'm using your present state as an example of how the mind can work, provided you fully recognize that it need not work that way. Why are you surprised that something happened in the dim past when it is so clearly happening right now? 27. You forget the love that animals have for their own offspring and the need they feel to protect them. This is because they regard them as part of themselves. No one disowns something he regards as a very real part of himself. Man reacts to his ego much as God does to his souls, with love, protection, and great charity. The reaction of man to the self he made is not at all surprising. In fact, it duplicates in many ways how he will one day react to his real creations, which are as timeless as he is. The question is not how man responds to his ego, but what he believes he is. 28. Belief is an ego function, and as long as your origin is open to belief at all, you are regarding it from an ego viewpoint. That is why the Bible quotes me as saying, "Ye believe in God, believe also in me." And that's a quote out of Matthew 14:1. It actually starts off that, he quoted that, but it starts off, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." What a beautiful encouragement in the Bible. Well, he's using that to talk about this idea. Let's go back and look at belief in an ego function. Belief is an ego function, and as long as your origin is open to belief at all, you are regarding it from an ego viewpoint. That is why the Bible quotes me as saying, "Ye believe in God, believe also in me." Belief does apply to me because I am the teacher of the ego. When teaching is no longer necessary, you will merely know God. Belief that there is another way is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. That is because it contains a hint of recognition that the ego is not the self. Undermining the ego's thought system must be perceived as painful, even though this is anything but true. Undermining the ego's thought system must be perceived as painful, even though this is anything but true. He gives a good example for that. Babies scream in rage if you take away a knife or a scissors, even though they may well harm themselves if you do not. The speed up has placed you in the same position. You are not, 29, you are not prepared in this sense. You are not prepared, and in this sense you are babies. You have no sense of real self-preservation and are very likely to decide that you need precisely what would hurt you most. Whether you know it now or not, however, you have willed to cooperate in a concerted and very commendable effort to become both harmless and helpful, two attributes which must go together. In yoga, we call that ahimsa, harmlessness, the first of the yamas and the niyamas. Whether you know it or not, however, you have willed to cooperate in a concerted and very commendable effort to become both harmless and helpful, two attributes which must go together. Your attributes even toward this, your attitudes even towards this are necessarily conflicted, because all attitudes are ego-based. This will not last. Be patient a while and remember that the outcome is as certain as God. The outcome is as certain as God. He says, be patient. We'll get there. That you'll know instead of perceive. We get our perceiving straightened out so we don't get angry anymore. And then we can move on into knowing. Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is quite obvious when you consider the concepts involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, then you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better so that you can do without the thing you give. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos and is therefore continually preoccupied with the scarcity principle which gave rise to it. This is the meaning of Freud's reality principle, since Freud thought of the ego as very weak and deprived, capable of functioning only as a thing in need. 31. The reality principle that Freud talked about, the reality principle of the ego is not real at all. The ego is forced to perceive the, in quotes, reality of other egos because it cannot establish the reality of itself. In fact, its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. Self-esteem in ego terms means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself into accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory. This self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which actually refers to the condition in which the delusion of the ego's reality is threatened. This produces either ego deflation or ego inflation, resulting in either withdrawal or attack. The ego, and the last paragraph we'll read today, 32, the ego literally lives by comparison. The ego literally lives by comparisons. This means that equality is beyond its grasp and charity becomes impossible. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for abundance. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. All appetites are getting mechanisms, representing the ego's need to confirm itself. This is as true of bodily appetites as it is of the so-called higher ego needs. Bodily appetites are not physical in origin. The ego regards the body as its home and does try to satisfy itself through the body, but the idea that this is possible is a decision of the ego, which is completely confused about what is really possible. This accounts for its erratic nature. That erratic nature ranging from deflation to inflation, from withdrawal in deflation to attack in inflation. We don't want either, though. Okay, let's take a look now at our lesson for today again. We're going to do it 6 times today for 2 minutes, and these are eyes open meditations. Well, you can start with your eyes closed, and I'd always encourage you to take a moment every day, even if it's just for a minute, to always be still and quiet. And the longer, the better. If you're a second-year student, my encouragement, you still spend 15 minutes at least twice a day. You don't have to do that. It's not by requirement. You may just want to do the lessons as they say to do them. But if you found a lot of assistance and help in those quiet times, well, I encourage you to keep them. Anyway, but for today, particularly first-year students, this is above all else, I want to see things differently. And we're going to look around as we say it, and we're going to simply say, I see that whatever tree differently. I'll do it for a couple minutes, and you all can kind of do your lesson as I'm singing along, huh? Above all else, I want to see things differently. Above all else, I want to see things differently. Above all else, I want to see differently. Above all else, I want to see differently. Above all else, I want to see that tree differently. Above all else, I want to see that snow clump differently. Now you all do it. Above all else, I want to see that differently. Above all else, I want to see that differently. Above all else, I want to see that differently. Above all else, I want to see that differently. Above all else, I want to see that differently. Above all else, I want to see that differently. Above all else, I want to see that differently. Above all else, I want to see that differently. Above all else, I want to see that duck differently. Above all else, I want to see that rooster differently. You all do it. Above all else, I want to see things differently. Above all else, I want to see things differently. Thank you all so much for joining me. May we open our minds to see with the vision of Christ. Start with an open mind. Above all else, I want to see things differently.